Hello, happy Monday, happy new week. We've got, as we teased up earlier last week, a lot of content, a lot of live stream coming for you this week from Veeam Software. First off, kicking this off is my colleague Jason Buffington and myself for our usual Monday installment of LinkedIn Live. Want to make sure that as we're going along here, please type in your questions into the LinkedIn chat. We've got a team monitoring that, and they'll be sending over some posts to us, and we'll be able to answer you in real time. But Jason, let's tease up today's topic, which is around Microsoft Office 365. There's a fair amount of ground to cover, a couple of things we could delve into. Why don't you take it away and just kind of give at a higher level the Veeam Microsoft long-standing relationship and capabilities that we offer jointly?
Yeah, one of the things I was so delighted about when I first joined Veeam is the length and tenure and richness of the Microsoft relationship. I actually spent 6 years at Microsoft as a product manager around data protection and storage infrastructure as one of my past lives. So I love the partnership that we have. This is a really, really busy eye chart of all the different things that Veeam and Microsoft do together. We're not going to talk about them. I've got a whole webcast I do on this, but I do think it's important to recognize, certainly Veeam started as a virtualization-centric company that's not only VMware, but also Hyper-V and Nutanix. We also back up physical because there are still physical boxes in the environment. So if you look, say, lower left and work your way up, yes, we cover Windows Client, we cover Windows Server and some Linux. We cover all the major hypervisors. And then as you go up, certainly as organizations move towards the cloud, right? Cloud-based infrastructure is part of that. And so we have native protection for Windows and Linux within guest OSs hosted in Azure, as well as native protection for Azure. We announced that earlier this year. But as I think about the journey to cloud for many organizations, that journey, the epitome of that is leveraging software as a service. And we have a phenomenal amount of experience with Office 365 and protecting that. So I thought that might be an interesting way for us to kick off our first live stream for the second half of 2020.
Perfect. And I got to jump in here because we already have a question from, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name, but Hridesh, I believe. And I think you're going to cover it, Jason, but I just love Hridesh's question because it's like a land speed record for like 120 seconds into this, and we've already got our first cue. So what gets asked here is, what are the main features of VBO, meaning Veeam Backup for Office 365, BBO 365, and can we use it for end user backup?
Ooh, there's a lot of richness. Can I have the next 20 minutes to answer that question, please?
That's why I say you could unpack this as we go through it, because I think you're going to get to it naturally. But I do want to comment that, Hridesh, I think we're going to be able to touch upon that. And then in a little bit, we'll get to the next question as well.
Yeah, no. So first and foremost, the thing that we want to talk about is the fact that Office 365 is actually not even a product, right? It's a whole suite of products, and we are going to talk about the pieces that for a lot of folks, when people say Office 365, what they first actually mean is just Exchange Online, just the mail part of that experience. But there's a lot more to that, and we should talk through that. But let's talk about Office 365 for a second. If we go to the next slide, we did some research. Specifically on this. We talked about, does your organization use Office 365 today? That's the chart on the left. Remember, this is the survey research that came out of our data protection trends report. That's over 1,500 unbiased enterprises around the world. And to Hridesh's question, 65% of organizations said that when they use Office 365, it's not only just for email, but they also use OneDrive and SharePoint. Another 18% use just the email functionality. And then you can see there's 16%, 8% say they have a plan to within the year. We're halfway through the year, so let's assume half of them are now doing it. Another 4% say they're interested, and only 4% of organizations say no interest, nothing at all. We should also point out that Hamed's question came in as well around, can you use other parts of that system as well? So as Office 365 continues to grow in proliferation, the question becomes, it has to be more than just email, because Office 365 is more than just email.
Right.
And so we're going to talk more about that.
Perfect. So, if we think about that, if we recap, O365, Microsoft Office 365. It's a platform. It has many sets of sort of blades of functionality inside of that, probably best known for the email functionality. And then roughly 50-50, of SharePoint and then OneDrive and some other things, including things that we'll talk about and what Ahmed mentioned, as well as some additional capabilities that we've announced just a couple weeks ago at Veeam. But I think what's pretty clear from what we see here is that the majority of organizations, once they consume Office 365, they tend to consume it more broadly, meaning not just email alone.
Now, here's the danger, though, Dave. The problem with most SaaS-based offerings is customers assume that SaaS is natively backed up by the SaaS provider. Right. And when you think about, for as long as you and I have been in this industry, 30 years or more each, right? For as long as we've been in this business, there's always been two reasons why that you did data protection. The first one is because stuff breaks, right? And when stuff breaks, how do you get the users productive again? And you got to give hats off to the mature SaaS offerings that are out there, because mature SaaS offerings do have multiple points of presence. They do have near synchronous replication between those points of presence. And so if I can't get to my mail in Redmond, Washington, I'll get to it from Phoenix, or I'll get to it from Dublin, Ireland, and I don't care, right? I get my mail or my OneDrive or my SharePoint. So SaaS in many ways does solve that durability or resiliency requirement. But the other part of why we've always backed up our stuff is because you need previous versions, right? You got to have the version that I pulled up last month's Word doc and I overwrote it instead of save as. Right? I need the version that doesn't have malware or ransomware on it. I need the version that was before the user was deleted or before the user was fired. I need previous versions. That still holds true, even if you've chosen to go to a service instead of a server for your infrastructure. And that's where I think so many people fall short. If we bring up that second slide again, the one with the two wheels on it, take a look at that right-hand side. When organizations were asked, how do you back up your stuff, right? If it was running on-prem, you'd be backing it up. The question becomes, how do you back it up when it's in the cloud? And for 68%, over 2 out of 3 organizations, they say, oh, we're using built-in. If you're using built-in for Exchange, that means you're using the recycle bin. 14 days, best case. That is not backup.
Yeah, and I think one way to look at this is, a lot of what you've described there is hardening by the part of Microsoft of resiliency of infrastructure. So there are multiple data centers geographically dispersed, to your point. There are multiple of every kind of piece of rack and stack gear that you can imagine. However, from a data integrity perspective, from a logical corruption perspective, don't let that resiliency of infrastructure fool you into thinking that you've got a known good copy of your data. The old joke from a replication perspective is 3 bad copies of your data does not equal 1 good copy of your data. And I know you like to, as much as I do, sort of poke a little fun at a phrase that gets used, not just by this one software as a service provider, but by several. And it's called a shared responsibility model, which can mean many different things, but essentially shared means it's partially provider and partially the consumer or the data center that's electing to vend out these services. And when you vend out the services, you don't abdicate responsibility for data integrity. What it really just means is you don't have to do all of this yourself. You're going to essentially subcontract pieces of it, but that's the key, isn't it? It's pieces, not 100%.
That's exactly right. Right. So when so this last weekend, my oldest son got engaged. And so and we think the world of the young lady that he is now betrothed to. But when we talk to them about what a partnership means, it means we're in this together and we're going to do all of this together. Right. That is not actually how a shared responsibility model works in IT. In IT, it's more, we're going to do these parts, right? And you're responsible for those parts. And by the way, we're going to let you know what your parts are, right? So it's much more like the city provides water and electricity right up until my driveway. And everything past that point, it's up to me to maintain. It's up to me to make sure there's no leaks and to do the repairs and everything else. I can't blame the city when I have bad power or when I have a leak in my bathroom. I don't get to blame the city for that. That's my job. And so what a lot of folks don't understand is in the SaaS model, it's not a partnership. It's a provider and mutual responsibility model. So,
and the mutual kind of cracks me up to some degree because it's as mutual gets, meaning there's not an overlap like a Venn diagram where there's a union of two circles come across. Mutual in this context means it's either provider, and if it's not, therefore, then it must be the consumer or the data center people. There's not a lot of joint activity in any of the sub aspects of that, meaning we're not going to help Microsoft make their infrastructure more resilient. Microsoft is not inherently going to keep multiple versions and copies of our data for whatever, 120, 180 days, or however long that we might like. But certainly we don't want to pick on Microsoft. This is not unique. This is software as a service. But what is unique to this specific notion of software as a service, meaning Microsoft Office 365, is it's about the only SaaS app you can do something with if you've got the data, because you actually already do have the application, whether it's Exchange or SharePoint or Outlook to read email or any of the other types of things we'll be talking about. Teams is but one example. Here, not only is it in your best interest and good hygiene to protect the data, but you've got a legitimate plan B if things go badly. If you've got the data, you can still consume it and use it.
Man, I love that point. I love what you just said there. The other way to say that is Microsoft is actually a great example for us to learn from, not only because they are such a prolific platform as a SaaS provider, but also because in many ways we manage Office 365, or organizations do, the same way that you manage the on-prem versions of those same platforms, right? So the Exchange admin who's used to managing Exchange on-prem knows how to manage Exchange in Office 365. The SharePoint admin knows how to do SharePoint Online. The file admin knows how to or to a lesser degree, OneDrive for Business. But there is a comparable set of skills on both sides, which lets us use this as a case study, right? Not a point to pick on, but a case study on what that would look like. So let's kind of talk through where those expectations line up and where they don't and using Office 365 as an example. So if we bring up the third slide, this is kind of the slide that I use when I talk to Veeam customers and prospects around, okay, so where is that? Let's call it a mutually exclusive responsibility model, not a shared responsibility model. And so, for example, I think there's kind of 5 things that folks need to be thinking about. One is, how do you keep the users productive? Right. And then there's those things around, okay, what about legal hold? And what about regulatory compliance? And what about backups? And so what you're looking at here is the blue part of each of those wedges is where I just tip my hat and say, nice job, Microsoft. You actually did a fantastic job on this. And then the green is where Veeam can complement or supplement the built-in capabilities within Office to give it the rest of that experience of what you would typically get out of a data center, if that makes sense, Dave.
Yeah, it totally does. And I like how you've color coded that. It's a nice graphical representation of what we were speaking to, verbally. And the other thing that captures, my eye is, while on the one hand, it looks like there's maybe a lot going on in the slide, meaning kind of the top portion and the right portion, I almost would say the converse is true, meaning Veeam plus Office 365 and the ability to help manage and migrate data to and from on-prem, as well as the SaaS-based application. Veeam is a management construct that overlays your on-prem capabilities, and hence that's why we can pull data back and you can consume it readily because you have the app. And to your point, I thought it was a great one, Jason, is that not only can you consume it because the bits are readable because you've got an application to do that, but you brought up a great point that oftentimes gets overlooked, that I already have training, I already have administrative capabilities and understanding and a practice how to do this. This isn't a fire drill of let's registry hack open Salesforce and hope we can get someone's telephone number because it's the end of the quarter. That really is kind of like doing pioneering work for most organizations. They have not done that before.
Oh
This
yeah.
is, we go from like maybe it's a little bit of a yellow alert kind of trending to dark day, but not that dark because we can consume the data. We have an application to interact with it. We have many people that know the skills that are going to be required to go and do that interaction. So it becomes more of a resume versus a recover. So that's why I like the build out of this full chart. It just shows the multitude of ways that you can protect the very many different pieces of the O365 portfolio and how you can consume them wherever it's most appropriately for you to do so.
Well, and now let's put this in the context of July 2020, right? So we've talked a lot about in this pandemic world, those folks that are doing IT modernization and digital transformation efforts, anything that was rack and stack is still on hold. Anything that's let's use more cloud in order to enable these distributed workforces is accelerating. Office 365 is the perfect example of this. I can't tell you how many organizations that I've talked about where they said, we had been migrating 500 or 1,000 mailboxes a month or one business unit or one site at a time. But since I'm stuck at home and I'm not in the data center, I can double or triple that workflow. What that also means, though, is that my mailbox might have been on-prem Exchange in February. And by March or April, now it's running in Office 365. My user experience is no different, right?
Yes.
Oh, by the way, neither is the administration experience, right? If my Exchange admin needs to recover a mail message from 3 months ago, they bring up the Veeam Explorer for Exchange, go into my mailbox, pull that message, pull it back out. Now that my mailbox is over in Office 365, same Exchange admin, same Veeam Exchange Explorer, same single message recovery. That experience doesn't change. The only difference is whether it's VBR or VBO that's actually backing that data up. In fact, I got to confess, my own personal mail runs in Office 365, and I have a copy of Veeam Backup for Office 365 running at home, and I'm backing up my mailbox using the same technology that a Fortune 500 company would use. I just pay a little less for it. So.
We do have a question that came in from Alamgur, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name. I'm not sure if this is specific to O365 or Veeam in general, but it says, a question, is it possible to do real-time backups by Veeam Backup software? And I'll throw an answer into that, but I'd love to get your read on it too, Jason. If that's a notion of continuous data protection or CDP, something that Veeam's been talking about for a period of time now, and now we're going on 3 weeks that we've demoed that on stage at Veeam. We've got a tech preview out on CDP for about a year now, actually, almost exactly a year. So there is that capability. If it relates specifically to O365, there are some what I'll call near CDP-like data capture tolerances that we can achieve. But love to get your read on how you would answer that question, Jason.
Yeah, so I think the question came down to, from Veeam Backup software. So to be a little less precise, if we're talking about the traditional data center software, so Veeam Backup and Replication, then yes, we just announced CDP kind of functionality. If we're talking about in today's context around Office 365, remember that CDP in general, the idea of continuous or near continuous replication, is designed around shrinking the data loss window due to an abhorrent error, right? And so because Office 365 actually does do native replication between multiple sites, it actually suffices for CDP. In fact, Dave, when you and I talked about CDP in VBR v11 that was announced a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how some applications that are transactional applications already have synchronous replication built in, and Office 365 is actually one of those apps that actually does suffice for that part already. Where backup comes in SaaS is really much more around versioning and not really as much around that continuity. You don't need for Veeam to supplement that within the Office 365 part of the portfolio. Other apps that need that level of protection but don't have that level of built-in replication, that's where our V11 CDP is really going to rock. So, hey, I'm doing a time check on this. Let's kind of unpack those 5 wheels though, because CDP and those kind of aspects actually fit really nicely in that first one. If we bring that chart back up with the 5 bullets on it, let's give props where props are due, right? So service resiliency, which is where CDP would also kind of fit in. Microsoft does have that built in. That's an all blue circle, right? You're not going to typically fail over Office 365. You're going to wait a few seconds. DNS is going to update, and you're going to get your mail from your second location. Where you really start talking about versioning, that's where backup matters. Whether that data was on-prem or whether that's in the cloud, anything where versioning is part of the business requirements, that's where we should be complementing what's native to the platform. So in Office 365 case, they do have a concept of legal hold. So if you continue to pay for a license for an executive who's left the company and you need to freeze that mail, you can, right? But you're freezing that mail. That is not a perpetual extended retention window. You would not say use legal hold on something that had a 7-year or a 10-year retention window on it. You would back that up, right? And so that's where we complement. Same thing for regulatory, right? If you have a 10-year retention window, that's not SaaS's job. That's our job.
Right.
We do that. So we complement for that. Same thing for operational backups, right? So for a lot of organizations, let's be honest, 14 days in a recycle bin is probably good enough, right? Most of the stuff that I screw up, I figure out I screwed up in less than 2 weeks, right? So the recycle bin probably works. If it's 7 days, it's a little bit more dicey. If it's 30 days, it's pretty generous. But when you need last month or last year, right, just those operational backups or doing data mining, that's backup. That's us. And then I guess the last piece that I would offer for any organization that's going through this window is, as you're looking at, and Dave, chime in on this, how many weekends did you give up in the early days of doing migrations and upgrades where it's like, hey, we're moving to the new platform? And that every migration project I ever was on, every weekend always started with, did you do a final backup? Did you test the backup? Right? And until you did those two things, you did not do a migration project. And the fact that you're moving from on-prem into Office 365, you ought to do that last backup, right? That is your point of your copy of last known good. And oh, by the way, that backup actually makes a pretty good source to actually populate your Office 365 environment. So now you've not only validated your backup, you know that that's what's actually in that cloud. So we can actually help accelerate and keep compliant many migration strategies, especially for sensitive data. So just understand that's that complementary nature of really a partnership.
The big thing that strikes me with migration, sort of more modern times, is you're absolutely right. It used to be, let's get a full backup, a good backup, a known restorable state on whatever that may be, Friday afternoon. Part of that Friday afternoon drill for the Saturday / bleeding into Sunday, get ready to get live again for Monday is everyone okay? Like, are the applications teams, are the ops teams, is everyone ready for this? And everyone always says yes. And it's pretty common by 6 o'clock at night on Friday, someone cries foul, or worse yet, Monday morning, someone says, hey, I couldn't take down this app. It's a critical issue that we have to deal with. So your migration got pushed out. It was like a false launch. The rocket's on the launch pad, but something T minus whatever minutes or hours delayed that. And because it was such heavy lifting and because the stakes were so high, you punted out of any kind of migration at the first sign of danger. That was a responsible thing to do. Now I think we're getting better. We're getting more complete. We're getting faster at migration, but the onus is still on us to do the right kind of housekeeping to make sure we're in a good state to be able to go over.
Let's that last nugget is something that I wish we could kind of literally rewind the audio and play that last piece again, because the responsibility of housekeeping, one of the other challenges that you often see, and you and I have seen this for as long as people have been modernizing their IT structure, is just about the time when you are migrating off of a mature, let's call it venerable IT platform, and you're moving to that next platform of choice. How many times have you and I seen where a customer went from well-protected to unprotected as they were modernizing their production infrastructure? And truly, if folks are not paying attention to anything else, you just have this on the background, hear me on this. As organizations are moving from on-prem platforms into SaaS, most if not nearly all SaaS platforms do not back themselves up. In fact,
Right.
many SaaS applications don't have a way to be backed up, right? So you move from on-prem, well-protected, well-recoverable, easy to retain, long-term, compliant, all those wonderful things into this new production platform because of the new things it will enable for your business. And at the same time, you actually end up undermining your protection and compliance standards. So be really sensitive to, as you move to these new platforms, from the day that you light up Office 365 or any other SaaS application, is it backupable to the same standards that you hold data that you protect on-prem? If not, that should be a deployment blocker for going to that new SaaS app.
Yep.
And in this case, as you're moving, the right time to decide your Office 365 backup strategy, there's 2 days that are most important. The day that you deploy that first mailbox and now, right? Those are the 2 best days to make sure that you have Office 365 backup. The first, when that first mailbox moves over, you got to know, is it backed up from the day data hits it? And the second best day to figure out what your Office 365 backup strategy is today. Because if you don't have one, let's go fix that, right? Hey, we got 3 minutes left. We should probably go into Veeam mode for a second. This has been a good case study, but let's go ahead and go to our last slide in the deck and just kind of make sure folks understand. When we talk about this, this is not theory for us, right? So, so what you're looking at here is the architecture diagram for Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365 version 4. We've been at this a while. We actually just announced V5 at our Veeam On event, coming soon to a SaaS data platform near you. There was a question actually in the LinkedIn thread earlier on, what about other pieces that aren't on this list? Just in V5, we announced Teams, which we are super excited about. So look in that upper left-hand corner. Office 365 is not just Exchange. It's also SharePoint. It's also OneDrive. We're adding Teams onto that. We will continue to expand that as users embrace more and more of Office 365, so will we. You can run Veeam Backup for Office 365 on-prem, like I do, or you can run it in Azure. You can run it in some other cloud, right? You can run it anywhere you want. And then from there, you can store that data on-prem. You can store it in Azure Blob and any other S3 compatible. And then, as we talked about earlier, you can recover, the Exchange admin can recover Exchange data. The SharePoint admin can recover SharePoint data. The SaaS admin can recover the entire farm. All of those are options that come out of that. This is the right way to back up a SaaS application. Dave?
Nice. Perfect. Well, I think that's a great recap on O365, meaning from a Microsoft, but also Microsoft and Veeam perspective. And as we just foreshadow a little bit of the rest of the week, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have two Veeam and VMware simulcast, meaning on GoToWebinar as well as simulcasted on LinkedIn Live. So we'll be able to take your questions there. Then on Friday at 11 Eastern, we're going to have Gilbert Lowe interviewing Jim Tedesco about how you can get the most or maximize your Veeam investment. So we've got 2 more live streams coming at you this week. Thank you very much for tuning in. Stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you on the channel again.
Take care.